Hey guys, today we are learning all about the anatomy of a calf. You see, a calf may not look that cool on the outside, but they're really cool on the inside. They've got muscles and intestines and organs and even tissues. Well, maybe not that kind of tissue, but you get the point. Come on, follow me and we'll see what a calf looks like.
Next, we are going to talk about the systems of the body and their components in the head. We will start with the nervous system, which is comprised of the cerebrum, cerebellum, and brainstem. The cerebrum contains the two cerebral hemispheres, including the cerebral cortex and the basal nuclei. It encloses the cavities of the lateral ventricles, and its surface area is increased by convex ridges called gyri and furrows called sulci. The longitudinal fissure separates the cerebrum into its right and left hemispheres. The cerebellum features two lateral hemispheres and a median ridge called the vermis. The surface consists of many laminae called folia. The cerebellum is critical to the accurate timing and execution of movements and coordinates muscle activity. Ventral to the cerebellum is the pons, which surface possesses visible transverse fibers that form a bridge from one hemisphere of the cerebellum to the other. The brainstem includes the diencephalon, midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. The diencephalon includes the thalamus, epithalamus, hypothalamus, and the third ventricle. The thalamus is a relay center for nerve fibers that connects the cerebral hemispheres to the brainstem, cerebellum, and spinal cord. The epithalamus includes the pineal gland, which secretes melatonin. The hypothalamus surrounds the ventral part of the third ventricle and contains many nuclei that function in autonomic activities and behavior. The brain also has a lateral and fourth ventricle. The pituitary gland is attached to the ventral part of the hypothalamus. The midbrain lies between the diencephalon and the pons, and it features the two cerebral peduncles and four colliculi. The two cerebral peduncles are large bundles of nerve fibers connecting the spinal cord and brainstem to the cerebral hemispheres. The colliculi are small bumps on the dorsal side of the midbrain. The medulla oblongata is the cranial continuation of the spinal cord and contains important autonomic centers and nuclei for cranial nerves. The meninges are the connective tissue coverings of the brain and spinal cord. They include, from deep to superficial, the pia mater, the arachnoid, and the dura mater. The pia mater is a delicate membrane that invests the brain and spinal cord, following the grooves and depressions closely. The arachnoid layer has connecting filaments called the arachnoid trabeculae. The dura mater is the tough fibrous covering of the central nervous system. It is attached to the inside of the cranial bones. The next system we will discuss is the digestive system. The digestive system begins with the lips and mouth. The space between the lips and teeth is called the oral vestibule. The dorsal wall of the oral cavity comprises the hard palate rostrally and the soft palate caudally. The hard palate has a thick mucous membrane that is characterized by transverse folds called palatine rugae. The soft palate extends toward the base of the epiglottis. Once food passes the lips, it must pass the teeth, which are arranged in two dental arcades, one associated with the mandible and one with the incisive and maxillary bones. The two types of teeth are brachiodont and hypsodont. Brachiodont teeth have a short crown and a neck. Hypsodont teeth have a straight crown and no discernible neck. Ruminants do not have incisors in the upper dental arcade. Instead, they have a dense, keratinized dental pad. The tongue is a massive muscle that is covered by a mucous membrane. It is divided into the apex, at the rostral end, a body, and a root, which is adjacent to the pharynx. It is attached to the hyoid apparatus. The tongue is covered with stratified squamous epithelium, and the surface has papillae, which are small projections. The types of papillae are filiform, fungiform, and valate. Ruminants have additional conical papillae. Filiform and conical papillae do not have taste buds, but others do. Filiform papillae are hair-like and are located on the apex of the tongue. Fungiform papillae are interspersed among the filiform papillae and resemble tiny mushrooms. Valate papillae are large circular projections that are surrounded by a deep groove. They are arranged in a V shape on the caudal part of the body of the tongue. Conical papillae are located on the body of the tongue. The mouth also has palatine rugae and conical papillae on the cheek. Once food passes the tongue, it then passes the pharynx and enters the esophagus. The esophagus is a muscular tube that extends to the stomach. The next system we will be covering is the respiratory system. The respiratory system begins with the nose and the external nares. The nasal cavity is separated from the mouth by the hard and soft palates and is separated into two halves by the nasal septum. The nasal cavity leads to the sinuses, which are air-filled cavities. The sinuses provide protection and insulation to the head. The next part of the system is the pharynx, which is a soft tissue conduit for food and air. It lies caudal to the oral and nasal cavities. The pharynx is supported by a bony framework called the hyoid apparatus. It includes the stylohyoid, ceratohyoid, thyrohyoid, and basohyoid bones, as well as the lingual process. After the pharynx comes the larynx, which is the opening to the trachea. It maintains a box-like shape with a series of paired and unpaired cartilages. Its function is to regulate the size of the airway and prevent substances other than air from entering the trachea. Part of the larynx at the base of the tongue is the epiglottis and the epiglottic cartilage. Lying next to it is the thyroid cartilage, which resembles a taco shell. It consists of two parallel plates called laminae. The laminae articulate with the other cartilages. Next is the cricoid cartilage, which attaches to the arytenoid cartilages. The arytenoid cartilages have a vocal process that attach to the vocal cords. The trachea extends from the end of the larynx. It is formed by a series of C-shaped tracheal rings that provide support. The tracheal cartilages are joined together by annular ligaments that give the trachea flexibility. The M. trachealis is a smooth muscle which affects the diameter of the trachea. The trachea passes the base of the heart where it divides into two principal bronchi. These bronchi divide into secondary and tertiary bronchi. The bronchi eventually branch into alveolar ducts, which terminate in clusters of air sacs called alveoli. The exchange of gas with blood takes place here. The final system that we will discuss in this section is the endocrine system, which functions are communication and regulation. Some of the glands associated with this system are the hypothalamus, pituitary glands, pineal glands, and the thyroid gland. The hypothalamus is ventral to the thalamus and forms the floor and wall of the third ventricle. The pituitary gland is attached to its base by the infundibulum. It has two lobes, the anterior and the posterior pituitary. Hormones secreted by the pituitary help control growth, blood pressure, certain functions of sex organs, etc. The pineal gland is located in the epithalamus and secretes melatonin. The thyroid gland is located in the anterior neck below the layers of skin and muscle. Its sole function is the production of the thyroid hormone, which affects nearly all tissues of the body and increases cellular activity. This concludes our discussion of the body's systems and their components in the head.
So while you're with me, we're going to go over the thoracic region and the forelimb of the bovine, starting with the muscles of the forelimb. There are four major muscles that make up the shoulder region of the forelimb, starting with the trapezius, rhomboides, latissimus dorsi, and the serratus ventralis. This is kind of an overview of what those four muscles look like from a lateral side. Here you have your serratus ventralis, you have the latissimus dorsi, the trapezius muscle all the way up here, and this rhombus-shaped muscle kind of gives it away. It's the rhomboideus. Here we have the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus muscle. These two muscles line the scapula and are divided by the scapular spine that runs right down the middle of the two. Next, we have the biceps and triceps brachii muscles. To the left, you can kind of see individual pictures of the two, versus to the right, you can see an entire upper portion of the forelimb, and you can see their location in relation to one another. The biceps brachii is actually here, and it's in front of the triceps brachii shown there. Here's an image of the subscapularis muscle and the scapular cartilage that we found during the dissection. The brachial plexus. So the brachial plexus is an extremely important structure when talking about the thoracic cavity and the forelimb. It's a network of nerves that runs from the spinal cord to the forelimb. It sends and receives signals. Here you can see a brachial nerve that's really thick, really obvious. And the last muscles that we're going to talk about and go over within this section are the pectoralis muscles. So you have your pectoralis major and your pectoralis minor. The pectoralis major is superficial to the minor. So you can see here especially, if this is the pectoralis major muscle, underneath it is the pectoralis minor muscle. Okay, so now let's move on to the muscles of respiration. There are three major muscles when talking about respiration. Starting with the diaphragm, shown here to the left. The diaphragm is a structure that's made up of skeletal muscle. and it separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. And the way that it works is when the diaphragm contracts, the volume within the thoracic cavity increases, and it allows air to be drawn into the lungs. The other two muscles are the internal and external intercostal. These muscles sit in between each rib, and they create and move the chest wall when the animal is breathing. The external intercostal contains fibers that are ventral and quadrate, and the internal intercostals contain fibers that are ventral and craniate. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the thoracic cavity region. Here's an image just showing kind of like the overview of what it looks like. You have the heart, the lungs, the ribs all around. You can kind of get the gist of what it looks like. Pleura is extremely important. It's an outer membrane that lines the inner surface of the thoracic cavity. There are three main passages that pass through the diaphragm. Within these images, you actually can't see the opening itself, but you can see each tubular structure that you can infer, hey, it runs through the diaphragm. So the aortic hiatus and the vena cava foramen, they are two separate passages and two separate openings, but they all travel from and to the same place. So they go from the heart to the lower portion of the body through the diaphragm. The esophageal hiatus is one that does the exact same thing, but instead goes from the mouth through the diaphragm to the stomach. So the respiratory structures that are involved within the thoracic cavity, the lungs are an obvious one. This is actually a picture of the left lung in a bovine. It's 3 lobes, so there's one right here, one right beneath it, and then this major one right here. This is a picture of part of the trachea. This little thing, if you look really closely, is actually the trachealis. It's a muscle that runs alongside the trachea. It's opening, but you can't really see it clearly, but these are the tracheal rings and then the annular ligaments that are in between those rings. I can draw a picture. So this is your trachea. The tracheal rings go along like that, and you can actually feel them versus an esophagus where it's a more smooth texture.
The circulatory system, primarily the heart. So pericardium is a serous membrane that surrounds the heart and encloses the pericardial cavity, which holds pericardial fluid. Here's a picture of the apex, which is just kind of like the bottom of the heart, and the coronary artery that runs right along there that supplies blood to the heart. Here's a picture of a heart cut open laterally. It shows the left and right ventricles. The right ventricle is much smaller than the left ventricle because the left ventricle has to pump and supply blood to the entire rest of the body. Here's a picture of the atrium on the outside of the heart. Here's a picture of chordae tendineae. What they do is they connect the papillary muscles to the rest of the heart, and then the papillary muscles are responsible for when they contract, they prevent inversion of the systole. Here's a picture of the vena cava. So the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve. It's not really clear in this picture, but the tricuspid valve is responsible for the right ventricle and the right atrium, and the bicuspid valve is responsible for the left ventricle and the left atrium. They both work to prevent backflow. And that's it.
The next section of the video is about the pelvic limb and the abdominal cavity. This section will cover muscles, digestion, excretion, and reproduction of the calf. So the first part is the abdominal muscles. And there are 4 major abdominal muscles that we need to look at. The external oblique abdominal muscles, the internal oblique abdominal muscles, the transverse abdominal muscles, and the rectus abdominis. The first 3, the external abdominals, the internal abdominals, and the transverse abdominals, all connect at the linea alba, which is a very fibrous white connective tissue that you will find at the ventral aspect of the abdominal cavity, as seen here. When looking at the abdominal muscles, you can see that the external oblique abdominal muscles run from cranial to caudal, the internal obliques run from caudal to cranial, and the transverse abdominal muscles run vertical.
So as you move to the rear portion of the animal, you will start looking at the muscles of the pelvic limb, which include the iliopsoas, the gastrocnemius, the adductor gracilis, semitendinosus, the semimembranosus, the biceps femoris, the quadriceps femoris, the gluteus medius, and the tensor fasciolata. The first ones you'll see on the rear portion of the leg are both heads of the biceps femoris as seen here, the gluteus medius, the tensor fasciolata, and the vastus lateralis, which is one of the 4 heads of the quadriceps femoris. As you move further back, you'll be able to see the semitendinosus, and medial to that the semimembranosus. You will also be able to find the gastrocnemius and the iliopsoas, the adductor, and the gracilis. Once you've covered the outer muscles, you can start looking into the abdominal cavity, where you'll be able to see aspects of the digestive system, the urogenital system, and the reproductive system. The first thing to look for after cutting into the abdominal cavity is the esophageal hiatus. That is where the esophagus passes through the diaphragm into the abdominal cavity. The abdominal cavity is lined with a serous membrane that helps to lubricate and keep everything in place. This membrane is known as the peritoneum. Once the esophagus passes through the diaphragm, you will be able to see the 4 stomach compartments of the ruminant stomach. These are the rumen, the reticulum, the omasum, and the abomasum. The rumen, when it develops, it will have papillae. The reticulum will have a honeycomb-shaped wall. The omasum will have many layers called plies, and the abomasum will have a smoother surface where hydrochloric acid and pepsin are produced. The different textures of the stomach walls help you differentiate the 4 stomach compartments. One important aspect to know about the abdominal cavity and the stomach compartments is the sulcus ruminoreticularis, or the esophageal groove. This is a muscular structure which allows milk in young animals to bypass the rumen and reticulum stomachs and go directly into the omasum and abomasum. This allows the milk to bypass the active digestion and go straight to the abomasum for more gastric and enzymatic digestion. Once the digesta passes through the last stomach compartment, the abomasum, it will enter into the small intestine. The first portion of the small intestine is the duodenum, followed by the jejunum and the ileum. While looking at the digestive portion of the animal's stomach, you will also notice some accessory glands, including the liver, the pancreas, and the gallbladder. These structures are all very important as they secrete enzymes into the small intestine, specifically the duodenum, for better digestion. The liver and gallbladder aid with the breakdown of lipids. The pancreas also secretes many enzymes, including trypsinogen, which becomes active trypsin, and ribonuclease, to name a few. The pancreas is also important for several endocrine functions, including insulin and glucagon production, which help regulate blood sugar. While looking at the digestive system, you may also notice a few extras, including the sphincter of Oddi, the ampulla of Vater, the duct of Santori, the duct of Wirsung, and the cystic duct and the hepatic duct. The sphincter of Oddi is a muscular valve that is located just prior to the ampulla of Vater and helps control digestive flow in the duodenum. The ampulla of Vater is the combined pancreatic duct and the common bile duct where it enters into the duodenum. The duct of Santori is the accessory pancreatic duct. The duct of Wirsung is the pancreatic duct. The cystic duct is the duct connecting the gallbladder with the common bile duct, and the hepatic duct is the bile duct from the liver and joins with the common bile duct to bring bile to the duodenum. Once the digesta passes through the small intestine, it will enter into the large intestine, which makes up the hindgut. The large intestine and hindgut is composed of the cecum, the colon, and the rectum. This area in a cow is mainly for water absorption and the storage of waste. Once waste is stored and builds up long enough in the rectum, or in the anus, it passes through the rectum and is excreted by the animal. That about sums up the digestive system, so next we will look at the lower aspects of the abdominal cavity and into the pelvic cavity, which will involve elements of the urogenital system and the reproductive system. The urogenital system is composed of the kidneys, the ureters, the urinary bladder, the urethra, and the penile ureter. The urogenital system is important for the filtration of blood and the formation of urine. The kidney in a bovine is a multi-lobe structure, as you can see by the diagram, featuring many lobes. Each lobe contains a cortex, an inner medulla. The outer lobes contain papilla, which drain into a minor calyx, which drains into the major calyx, which eventually drains into the ureter. The ureter connects the kidney to the bladder, where urine is stored until it is excreted through the urethra to the penile ureter and out of the body. As you can see in this slide, the urethra goes from the kidney to the bladder. The bottom picture shows the bladder from the animal that we dissected, which was very infected, as you can see by the very red color, as opposed to the top picture, which is a healthy bladder, which is much lighter in color. The reproductive system. The reproductive system in males, as shown here, features the penis, testes, and several accessory sex glands. The testes are where the animal produces testosterone, the sex hormone for males. The testes are stored outside of the body in a little sac called the scrotum. The testes develop in the abdominal cavity and then drop through the inguinal ring into the scrotum as guided by the gubernaculum. The testes are surrounded by several layers of protection, including the parietal layer and the visceral layer of the vaginal tunic. The testes are very sensitive, so the spermatic cord is very important for thermoregulation of the testes. The spermatic cord contains the pampiniform plexus, which is a venous network of capillaries that helps cool blood entering the testes to prevent the temperature from rising. The spermatic cord also contains the cremaster muscle, which helps elevate or lower the testes in colder or hotter weather to aid with thermoregulation. Another important feature of the spermatic cord is the ductus deferens, which is where sperm travel from the epididymis, where it's stored, up into the penis through the ductus deferens for ejaculation. There are two types of penis. The penis exhibited in a bull or male bovine is the fibroelastic penis. The fibroelastic penis is characterized by the sigmoid flexure and also that it is stiff even when not in use. The muscles that make up the penis are the ischiocavernosus and the bulbospongiosus. Another important muscle in the reproductive tract is the retractor penis muscle, which connects to the sigmoid flexure, and as it is there are two main types of penises. The penis that is exhibited in the male bovine. There are two main types of penises. The penis exhibited in the male bovine, or bull, is the fibroelastic penis. The fibroelastic penis is characterized by the sigmoid flexure, as denoted by SF in the diagram, and the fact that it is stiff even when the animal is not sexually aroused. The important muscles that make up the reproductive system in a bull are the M. ischiocavernosus, the M. bulbospongiosus, and the retractor penis muscle. The ischiocavernosus and the bulbospongiosus are the two muscles that make up the penis. The retractor penis muscle connects to the sigmoid flexure, and as it is contracted most of the time, it holds the flexure in place. However, when the animal becomes sexually aroused, the retractor penis muscle relaxes and then allows the penis to become more erect and exit the body to be used for sex. There are several accessory sex glands when looking at the male reproductive system, including the ampulla, the vesicular glands, the prostate, and the bulbourethral glands. These glands are important for secreting seminal fluid. The seminal fluid contains the seminal fluid secreted by these sex glands includes many nutrients and moisture that the sperm need to thrive and survive.
Wasn't that exciting?